In this video, we will be discussing data manipulation, also known as the insert, update, and delete commands. We're going to start with the insert command. The insert command is used to add rows to an existing table. The table name is specified into the insert into clause. The data is specified in the values clauses. If we have non-numeric data, it has to be enclosed in single quotes. And if a column list is not provided, a value must be listed for each column in the table. Let's go ahead and do some demo. I've already written out the create table statement for a table called ice cream flavors. So the scenario here is that Northwind Traders has decided that they're going to sell specialty ice cream, and they've decided they want to track this a little bit differently than their traditional products in a different table. So in this table, we've got a flavor ID. It's an identity. It starts at 1 and increments by 1, so this is our auto number field. I also created the primary key constraint down at the bottom. A flavor name and a brand name, both of those don't allow nulls. A description of the ice cream. The size, so this is going to say what size the container is. Unit price and wholesale price, both of these are decimal 6.2s, which means they can store prices up to $9,999.99. Allergen information, this is just going to be a text field. This is like the back of the carton where it says allergen information may contain nuts, contains milk products, etc. And an is active field. So this is a bit, true, false. It's not null, so we can't have true, false, and null in this field, which is good for bits. We don't want to allow nulls in bits. And I'm going to assign a default 0. So by default, the flavor is not active. We're going to include that as we go. Typically, when you add a new record, it may not be active right away. You might need to add additional information before you decide to activate it. So we're going to start with 0 if it's not specified. So we talked about the primary key. I also added 2 check constraints for unit price and wholesale price. The unit price has to be greater than 0, or it could be null if we don't know it, but we don't want any negative numbers in here. Same thing goes for the wholesale price. I also added a unique constraint, and I said for each combination of flavor name, brand name, and size, it must be unique. So I don't want the same flavor in the same brand with the same size listed more than once in this table. I'm going to go ahead and create this table. So now our table is created. Let's go ahead and add some data. We're going to use our insert command. Insert into ice cream flavors. And I'm going to say values. And at this point, the way I've set this insert command up, I need to list out each value for each column in the table, and they must be listed in order. So flavor ID, this is our identity field. Let's talk a little bit about that. When we have an identity, we don't actually insert a value into that field. We skip it. SQL Server is going to handle that. We don't list the column name. We don't list a value for it. SQL Server will put the next value in it for us. So I'm going to skip that one. Let me get a little bit more screen space here. I don't list anything for flavor ID. Now I need the flavor name. Let's go with Death by Chocolate. Chocolate is one of my favorite ice cream flavors. Let's say that this is the Kemp's. So first column correlates to the flavor name because we skip the flavor ID. Second column correlates to brand name. Third one will correlate to description. And the description for this is so much chocolate, you can't handle it. Remember, when we have an apostrophe, we have to escape it with another one. Size, we're going to say this is 1 quart. Unit price, what we're going to sell this for, $5.99. It's a number, so it doesn't go in single quotes. And then we've got the wholesale price. Let's say Northwind Traders bought this for $2.49. Allergen information, I'm going to say contains milk. And then is active, I'm going to say 0. This is not active yet. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to run it. And I get 1 row affected. That means it worked. So now I'm going to write a select statement and just show all the data from the table. Here it is, Death by Chocolate, Flavor ID 1. All right, let's go ahead and add some more. We can actually simplify this just a little bit. So let's say we're adding a bunch of flavors and we're not really sure what the prices are going to be yet. We don't have that information from our suppliers. We haven't determined what we're going to sell it for yet, but we're getting ready to sell this ice cream. I don't really want to have to specify values for these fields if I don't know what they are. I don't want to have to put a null in there. So I can include a column list in my insert statement. Insert into ice cream flavors. And I'm going to list out the columns I'm going to provide values for. So in this list, I have to provide a value for any column that doesn't allow nulls and doesn't have a default value. In this case, I only have to provide a value for the flavor name and for the brand name. But I'm going to do just a little bit more than that. I'm going to have the flavor name, brand name. Let's include the description and size and the allergen information. So now I have 5 columns I want to put information into. When I list my values, I'm going to list them in order. The first one is going to be the flavor name, next brand name, then description, size, and allergen information. So our next flavor is going to be vanilla bean. That's going to be by Edie's. Description, super vanilla flavor. Size, we'll go with 1 pint. Allergen information, again, contains milk. I can run this statement. And again, if I run my select statement, I can see that information is there. Now, I didn't specify the unit price and wholesale price. They got null values. I also didn't specify is active, but I got the default value of 0. All right, so let's go ahead and add some more ice cream. Now, instead of continuing to do one statement at a time, I can actually add multiple values clauses. So let's go ahead and change something. Let's do mint chocolate chip. I hear that's a flavor a lot of people like. That's not a favorite of mine. Let's have this be by minty chocolate chip. Let's have this be a half gallon. And this also contains milk. Now, if I want to add another row, I'm just going to copy my values clause, and add a comma and list the next set of values. Let's add some Cherry Garcia, Ben & Jerry's, and we're going to give it a description of chocolate cherry goodness. Ben & Jerry's flavors come pretty small, so let's call it a half pint. And that's also going to contain milk. And I'm not sure if this is a Ben & Jerry's flavor, but it sounds like it. The swirl with the dragon cashew. I'm going to copy paste here. And we're going to say vanilla ice cream with swirls of caramel and cashews. This is also going to be a half pint. It contains milk and nuts. And then for our lactose intolerant friends, let's include some sorbet. I'm just going to make up a brand here, Italianos. I don't have a good description for this, so I'm going to explicitly state in our value. Remember, our description allows nulls. If I want to put in a null value, I just type null. Let's make this be 1 pint. And for allergen information, we're going to list NA. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this. So when this runs, I'll get 4 rows in the table. And it tells me 4 rows affected. And there's all the data in the table. So let's show one more thing. I'm going to copy one more. So let's add another flavor. Chocolate chip cookie dough. This can be used as well. Vanilla with chunks of chocolate chip cookie. Let's make this a half gallon. And let's also add in the unit price and wholesale price. Now if you remember, those have a constraint that says they must be greater than 0 or they could be null. So let's try to force a 0 into these columns. So this is going to be the 3rd and 4th columns. Let's see what happens when this occurs. We get an error that tells us that the insert statement conflicted with the check constraint. Check ice cream flavors, unit price, what database, what table, what column. So because the check constraint says that it has to be greater than 0, if I try to put 0 in, it doesn't matter. And you can actually see when I run the select statement that that row is not added to the table. So when we violate a constraint, the whole row is either accepted or rejected. It's never partially added to the table. So this refers to both insert and update statements. So if we add or modify data in the table, if things don't follow our check constraints or are not null constraints or are unique constraints, then the row is rejected. I'm going to come back to this slide in a couple minutes. We're going to move on to modifying existing data. So when we have rows in a table, if we want to make changes to anything, for instance, replacing a null value, we use an update command. Even if there is no data in a column, we still use the update command if that row exists in the table. So our update command, the update clause identifies the table, the set clause identifies the columns. We can have a where clause. This allows specific rows to be changed. If we skip this clause, all rows get updated. Let's say we want to add some unit prices to this table. I want to update ice cream flavors, set unit price. We're going to change vanilla bean to start. So let's make vanilla bean be $4.99. Now, if I were to just run this statement as is, the unit price on all of my rows would be updated to $4.99. This is not what we want to do. I want to add a where clause that identifies the rows, where flavor ID equals 2 with vanilla bean. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to add my comment in here. And now if I look at the table, I see that for vanilla bean, I have a unit price now. And I could do multiple rows at a time. I could change these all to is active if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Update ice cream flavors. Set is active equal 1. This will update for all the rows in the table. And now everything is set to 1. Now I can also do multiple columns at a time. So let's update the swirl with the dragon cashew. Let's set the unit price and the wholesale price. That's flavor ID 5. So Ben & Jerry's is kind of expensive ice cream for a half pint, or whatever the actual size of it is. We're going to set the unit price to $4.49. And then for the next column, I simply add a comma after that line, and I list the next column name. Wholesale price equal, let's say they bought this for $2.15. I'm going to run that. One row affected. And when I look at the data in the table again, we can see for this ice cream that both the unit price and the wholesale price were updated here. So that's our update statement. We can also do an update with the join. So let's go back to our insert from an existing table. So we've got this table. We've got the flavor name, we've got the brand name, description, and so on and so forth. Let's say that Northwind Traders also wants to be able to track more information about the brand. Who is the distributor? What is the information? To correctly normalize this data, we should really move the brand to its own table. So we want to create a table for ice cream brands. So I'm going to have the first can be a brand ID. It's going to be an identity. I'm going to start at 1 and increment by 1. Then I'm going to add the brand name. And I'm going to make this the same size as it was in the ice cream flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and check what that was. I'm going to copy this column. And then we're going to add the distributor name. And their contact phone number. And contact name and phone number. Now I need to add my primary key constraint. If you added it at the column level, that's perfectly fine. My personal preference is to just list them out at the end of the table. That's how I learned to do it. That's the way that makes most sense to me. I'm going to create this table. And what I'd like to do is move the brand from the ice cream flavors table into the ice cream brands table. So I want to move the brands from here into the new table. But if I look at this, I've got at least one duplicate here. So I want to make sure I don't have any duplicates. I'm going to write my select statement. So I'm going to select a distinct brand name from ice cream flavors. I'm going to run a query and I'm going to validate that the data is accurate. With the small subset of data we have here, it's not very difficult to do. But when you get out into the real world, you definitely want to write your select statements first before you insert or update or delete data to verify that the records are accurate. So now I'm going to insert them. So I'm going to simply say insert into an ice cream brand, like we did before. And I only have one column I want to insert into, which is the brand name, so I'm going to list here. And instead of having a values clause, I can actually just list my select statement. So for that whole values clause, I can simply put a select statement. And I'm just going to copy the select statement that I used to identify the rows and paste it below that insert line. I'm going to run it all together. And it tells me 5 rows affected. Now if I look at the ice cream brands table, you'll see that I have each brand name listed once. Ben & Jerry's is listed only once, even though we had it multiple times in the ice cream flavors table. Alright, so I had my brands moved, but in my ice cream flavors table, I still have my brand name. What I want to do is link this ice cream flavors, each flavor to its brand name based on the brand ID. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add a column to this table for the brand ID. Alter table ice cream flavors. Say add brand ID. It's going to be an int because that's what it is in the brands table. I'm also going to add a foreign key constraint. The foreign key is what forces the value to exist in the other table before it can be added to this table. So I can't put a brand ID in the ice cream flavors table unless that brand ID exists in the brands table when the foreign key is on the column. So this references clause states the primary key table and column. So that's the ice cream brands table, the brand ID column. The foreign key is in ice cream flavors, and it's the brand ID column there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And then I'm going to look at the flavors table again. And I can see I have a brand ID column, but it doesn't have any data yet. We need to update this. So our update command can also utilize a join, and it can update one table with data from another table. That's what we're going to do here. Again, the first thing we're going to do is write a select statement. I'm going to start with the select statement. Write the select statement to identify what the brand ID should be. So I've got my flavors table, I've got my brands table. Typically we join tables on the primary key foreign key relationship. We can't do that in this instance because the brand ID is null. There's nothing there. If we try to write this join, it won't work. So I'm just going to start with select start from ice cream flavors. I'm going to call that F. That's an alias. Join ice cream brands. Call that B. On FF brand ID. Now if it doesn't show up here, it's because of IntelliSense. In order to refresh your IntelliSense, it's Control-Shift-R. There we go. And sometimes it just won't refresh, in which case you can still type it. It might give you red squiggles because your IntelliSense isn't refreshed, but as long as the column actually exists, it won't cause any issues. This doesn't work because the brand ID is null in the flavors table. So what I actually want to join on, what these tables actually have in common, is that brand name. When I run that, I will get data. So what I want to show is the brand name from the flavors table, the brand name from the brands table, and the brand ID from the brands table. Because that shows me that these things link up, and I have a brand ID. So what I'm going to populate into my flavors table is the corresponding brand ID. So what we're going to do now is write our update statement. Update ice cream flavors, that's the table we want to update. Set brand ID equal, now we're going to come back to this. Now we wrote this select statement. This identifies the rows that are going to be updated. The join condition is correct. We're going to copy and paste the from clause. If we had a where clause, we would include that as well. I'm going to copy and paste that below our set clause. Now we're going to say set the brand ID equal to the brands table brand ID. So all the tables are joined correctly. We can verify that because of our select statement. And I'm going to write the update statement. And now when I look at my flavors table, I have brand ID here. And now I can go back to that statement that didn't work previously. And there should now be data, so this join should work. Now we can see that we have the brand ID from flavors, the brand ID from brands, and then the data matches between the two tables. All is good. So now we're at the point where we could drop this brand name. But what I'm going to do before we do that is I'm going to create a backup table just in case something went wrong. We have our old data. Now this isn't a bad idea to do whenever you're doing major changes to data that you can't reverse. So the easiest way to do this is going to be select star into, and we're going to specify a new name here, ice cream flavors. I use BKUp for backup from ice cream flavors. Tells me there's 6 rows affected, and I can actually select from this table. There's that table. If I go ahead and refresh my database, I will see that table here. Here's my ice cream flavors backup table. If I look at the columns, they're all identical except for I don't have a primary key here. And if I look at my constraints, the primary key constraint didn't get added, the check constraints didn't get added, the unique constraint didn't get added. So it's the same structure with the same null and not null properties for each column, the same column data types, but no constraints when I use this select into. Okay, so we've got our backup table created. Let's go ahead and drop the column for brand name in the flavors table. Over table, trade flavors. Top column, brand. And I can't do this because of my unique constraint. So I would have to drop the constraint first. So what I can do is actually copy the constraint and drop it first. Folder table, ice cream flavors, drop constraint, UK ice cream flavored ice cream. That constraint is dropped. Now I can run the command to drop the column. So now if I look at the ice cream flavors table, I've got a brand ID, my brand name is gone, all is well. I could go ahead and re-add that unique constraint with the brand ID instead of the brand name, but I'm not going to do that at this point. Since all the data checks out, everything is good with this table, at this point I'm going to drop the backup table. Drop table, ice cream flavors backup. And now it's gone. And if I refresh my database, I'll see that it's gone from my tables list. So next, removing data. We use our delete command to remove data. Again, as with our insert statement, when we want to select rows and move them over, or our update statement, the best practice, especially with delete statements, is to first write a select statement that identifies the data to be deleted. Let's go ahead and look at our flavors. Let's say that mint chocolate chip really wasn't that popular and nobody ever bought it. I'll buy that. I really don't like mint chocolate chip, though I know a lot of people do. But in our instance, no one has purchased this. We want to completely remove the record. So now we're going to write a select statement to identify the record first. I'm going to select star from ice cream flavors, where flavor E equals 3. I'm going to run it. I'm going to validate that this is in fact the record I want to delete. Then I can write my delete statement. Delete from ice cream flavors. I'm going to grab my where clause and paste it with my delete statement. So the where clause is the same as it was in the select statement, same table. Now I can delete it. Again, this might be a place where I want to create a backup table prior to deleting. One row affected. And I'll do the backup table in case I write a bad delete statement and end up deleting more records than I intended to. So I can see that mint chocolate chip is no longer listed in this table. Now, if there are rows here that, let's say there's ice cream they no longer wish to carry, but someone actually purchased this ice cream, we wouldn't want to delete it. That would actually cause issues for those purchased records. Let's say that the lemon sorbet, while it sold, it didn't really sell well. So they want to now not sell it anymore. Instead of deleting it, we're going to inactivate it. So I'm going to write my update statement. Update ice cream flavors. That is active equal 0, false, where flavor ID equals 6. And when I put my ice cream flavors again, we'll see the lemon sorbet is no longer active. So sometimes when we want to delete records from an application, what we actually want to do is inactivate them. So that was our delete command. We also have a truncate table command. So if I run a delete command without a where clause, it will delete all rows in a table. If I run a truncate table command, it will also delete all rows from the table. This is faster than the delete command when you have a very large table. However, it can't be used if there's a foreign key to this table. So for instance, my ice cream flavors table, I could truncate this table. There's no foreign keys referencing this table. My ice cream brands table, however, in the flavors table, there's a foreign key on this brand ID that references the brands table. I can't use a truncate on the brands table. So now here I'm going to go ahead and truncate the flavors table. I can say truncate table. And it simply tells me command completed successfully. Now when I look at my flavors table, I have no data. And I'll show you the truncate on brands table and how it doesn't work. So truncate table ice cream brands. When I run this, it tells me you cannot truncate the table because it's referenced by a foreign key constraint. So yes, I could drop the foreign key if I really wanted to. That's not what we want to do. Foreign keys are there for a reason. This doesn't work because there's a foreign key to this table. If I really want to delete all the data in this table, I have to use a delete command. So instead of truncate table, I would say delete from ice cream brands. All 5 rows are deleted. There's no data left in the table. So the last thing I want to do here is actually clean up. I want to get rid of these tables. So when I drop these tables, I need to do them in a specific order. If I try to drop my brands table first, drop table ice cream brands, I can't drop it because there's a foreign key on the flavors table to the brand table. The tables have to be dropped in the correct order. So any tables that have foreign keys to other tables need to be dropped first before those tables can be dropped. First drop the flavors table, then the brands table. Drop table ice cream flavors. Drop table ice cream brands. And then our tables are removed from the database. That concludes this video on data manipulation.